Hello everyone. I'm learning JavaScript understanding the weird parts course from Udemy. So today I'll share my learnings. So the tools that they asked to configure basically using Google Chrome. And then in Google Chrome, we can hit F12 on keyboard to open dev tools in Chrome. And for the editor, they requested to use an online editor, but since I already had VS Code installed, I ended up using that. One unrelated thing, since I'm mostly focused about using the JavaScript on web views in iOS, is here is a video that we can use on how to use Safari Inspector on iOS simulator. To talk about some of the big words that I learned, syntax parser. So a program that reads, basically it's a program that reads your code and determines what it does and if its grammar is valid. What is a compiler? Basically the compiler reads your code and makes sure that the syntax is correct and converts to something that the computer can understand. Another thing is lexical environment. So lexical environment exists in programming languages in which where you write something is important. Execution context. This is a wrapper to help manage the code that is running. Name value pair. A name which maps to a unique value. Objects. They are a collection of name value pairs. So talking about execution context, so the default execution context is the global, which is accessible everywhere. By default, JavaScript provides and creates the global object and a special variable to reference items here using this. Global means that you are not inside any function. In case you are running code in a browser, the global object is the window object, and you can also use this keyword to reference the global object. In terms of the outer environment, when running code inside the function, the outer environment is referred by it, but it is nothing when you are using the global context. So basically, if you in global context, if you declare a function and add something there, and within that function, if you call outer environment, then it will be the global object. Execution context. So there are two phases when executing the JavaScript code. One is the creation phase where the memory setup happens. So the global object, this and outer environment are set up. It also sets up space for variables and functions, which process is also called hoisting. So at this point, any variable will have its own memory space and it will be hoisted. In phase 2, execution happens. By default, the value here is undefined. So unless someone defines a value, it will be undefined. Here is an example. So here we defined a function and we logged and we console.logged this. And then we called this function. So it will print called B. Now, if we console.log A, it will say undefined because it's not defined. Even though below it is defining it with variable a is equals to hello world, above it it's still undefined and not erroring out because during the uh, phase 1, which is the creation phase, this variable is already created but its value is not set. Once the value is set in the next line, and if you log it, then it logs hello world. JavaScript is single threaded and has synchronous execution. There are ways to execute something and have some work like workers for parallel things. We will talk about it later. So invocation is basically calling a function. So here you have function B and function A, and function A is calling function B. If you call A, then it will call B. And here you have a global execution context, and there is an execution context created for function A. Similarly, an execution context created for function B. Functions, contexts, and variable environments. Variable environment where the variable live and how they are related to each other in memory. So let's say you have function B where you define myvar, function A where you define myvar and set it to 2, and from A you call B, and then you also in the global context set myvar to 1 and call A. So very interestingly, in global environment, my var is 1, but in function A, my var is 2. And in function B, my var is undefined because we have not defined it yet. Let's talk about scope chain. If a variable is not found in the execution context, it will look for it in the outer environment. So here you have function A within which you have function B. So uh, and then you have my var set to 2 and you call B, and in global context it is set to 1 and you call function A. So when we execute this, we call function A within which we have function B, and then we define myvar to 2, and then we call B, and then we console log myvar within B. Since myvar is not defined, so it is chains it to A, and it finds it as 2, and then it prints its value as 2. Scope, where a variable is defined in code. JavaScript also has a next version, ES6, which allows JS engine to use block scoping. So for example, here if A is greater than B, let variables error out if tried to use before declaration. Let C is equals to true. So in ES6, you have a new keyword let, which errors out rather than, as we saw in JavaScript, if a variable is defined later and called before it is defined, then we were getting an undefined value printed. But in if we use let keyword from ES6, then it will throw an error rather than printing an undefined value. How to make things asynchronous in JavaScript. When JavaScript is synchronous, how does it handle asynchronous event? So here we have defined a function wait for 3 seconds, which waits for 3 seconds, and then logs finished X function. And then we have a click handler, which logs clicked event. And then we are adding this click handler to the DOM on click. We call this click handler. Then we call wait for 3 seconds and we log finished execution. So first we see that finished function is printed because that's the first thing that we do, and it is a blocking function. Then we see finished execution because that's the next thing that executed. And only after everything in the execution context is finished, then it processes the event queue. So even if you click this document while processing is happening, click will be printed in the last. Dynamic typing, variables can, so sorry, so just to summarize, like even though JavaScript is single threaded, you can still have things that happen uh, in parallel, like for example this click handler, and you can print it later. So author also showed that in a web page you can have two different functions, one that does expensive work, and second that like let's say changes the color, background color. So the one that is doing expensive work, you can, rather than executing everything there, just post a message that expensive work is needed, and then call a, like write a function which will do that expensive work and post a message back. uh, so basically add those expensive things in the event queue rather than directly executing them, so that the single thread is not blocked. Dynamic typing, variables can, okay, JavaScript is also very interesting because here, for example, in any other language which has a static typing, if you say bool is new equals to hello, it will throw an error. But with dynamic typing in JavaScript, you can have is new equals to true here, and then is new as a string, and then is new is a integer. So like basically it's dynamically typed and inferred later as it is defined. JavaScript has 7 primitive types: undefined, null, boolean, number, string, and symbol. Symbol is only there in ES6, the new version of JavaScript. Cohesion is also an interesting concept. Here you can convert a value from one type to another by default. So for example, if I say var a is equals to 1 plus 2 as a string, then this whole thing is converted into a string and the log is 12. So that's the first 3 sections that the author covered. Thank you.